Okay, so then there's the highlighted, the suspended state, the openness, the highlighted quality of experience. Something comes forward, and I'm of course interested in a psychotherapeutic frame, so applying it there, with a client, then as you say, something comes forward about
You
the
just know
client.
something about a client right suddenly that you didn't know. Client hasn't told you. Or even in doing dream work with a client once, you kind of get their dream as they're telling you because they're reliving it, and you're open to perceiving that kind of I don't know. It appears to me as a picture. And I remember saying to this woman, "But you left out that table in the corner, and that was important." And she said, "Yeah, there was a table there, and it was because I'm in her dream with her, and she's looking at one part of it, and I'm looking around and going, what about that table? Because she put that there because it was in her picture. I was just looking at her picture, and it was important."
It's like a lucid dream where you're joining someone else's dream.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, she's reproducing her dream as she's telling it. She's reliving it, and I'm kind of merging into that somehow with her because I've opened my attention to be able to do that.
You're understandably critical of, well, Gestalt in particular, and obviously other modalities in
Oh,
general.
I like Gestalt.
But for the lack of training in this kind of awareness.
None of them train it. None of them interested in it. They always reduce it into some kind of woo-woo, hocus pocus, psychic bullshit, and it's not. That's not what it. That's not who I am.
And of course, the trouble that I have often when students are talking about their intuition, which I'm sort of want to often discourage, is that I see that there's so much projection in there, as you call it, that their actual capacity to perceive is mostly filtered. So I kind of discourage that as a notion, and at the same time I recognize and acknowledge what you're talking about as a biofield, and of course sometimes people can pick up those things, but often I kind of I'm cautious at the least because I see so much of that leaping into intuition, as we might call it, as too much
Leaping
turbulence.
into their story, their paranoid story or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. That goes on all the time. I'm not saying this doesn't just appear to be like, oh yeah, I really feel it's this. It's not the way it happens. It's just like kind of, it's like, very often it's like seeing a chair in the room and then just pointing at it in a logical, positive sort of way, going, chair. And what about that chair? What chair? The chair, the one in your dream? Oh, that chair. But I don't go, oh, I've had this intuition. When I tried to talk about it, I was studying with this Tibetan master, Tartang Tulku Rinpoche, and I was trying to talk about this. I said, it's a kind of intuition. And he grinned at me and he said, oh, you mean old lady's intuition? And most people, when they talk intuition, they're talking about feelings they have in their bodies and feelings they have, and then how they construe the meaning of those feelings. And this is all self-referencing. And to learn not to self-reference is a big part of the problem.
Yes, well, I'm glad you're talking about that, because I think that's partly what I'm very cautious about when people speak from that sort of place.
Yeah. And, if someone insists on it, which they often do, that's because when people are talking about intuition, they're very often talking about how they feel about something. And right, that is how they feel about it. But what they're mistaking is their feelings about it is who that person is, or who that thing is, or what that thing is. And they have no idea. It's to me also, as basically a statistical researcher, when someone says to me, oh, people really always believe this. And I say, you did your survey recently, and what was the sample size? And, you know, what was the reliability of your survey? And so I don't take any of that. One of the things that I think people, especially if they're training to be therapists, they need a good grounding in basic psychology, which they often don't get, like to recognize the fundamental attribution error, you know, or a good grounding in logic, you know. The argument, everyone says it's true. You know what that's called in logic? Argumentum ad populum. It's one of the informal fallacies of logic. You know, just because everyone says it's true doesn't mean it's true. Or, you know, you better believe it or I'm going to bust you in the face. You know, argumentum ad baculum. Like you better believe it or it's war. that sort of thing. So they don't have that basic grounding that I was fortunate to have, because I had a lot of, logic, philosophy, mathematics, science, physics. And you have to bring a certain kind of rigor and hard noses to it. And you have to say when you don't know, or you have to say, well, this is all I can describe of that, and I don't know what it means, and I don't know where this goes, but that was what I could see as a genuine perception, so I pass it on to you, but I can't do more with it than that, all right? Now, in the context of therapy, when you know a client and you know what's going on with them, you can take something like that further. But, and another thing I stopped doing years ago, people ask me, to tell them something about themselves. I say, write a check for $250.
Does anyone do that?
No. They want to be entertained. Because this looks entertaining, and it's not entertaining. When I was sort of a little confused myself whether this belonged in the psychological domain or this domain of psychics and, all that sort of stuff, I got invited onto a TV show in Switzerland. I was flown out to Zurich, and it was a whole entertainment thing where they were having, music and everything, and they had a few people supposedly like me. Well, I won't comment on the others, but I said, one of the things I do is I can get the imprint of someone's field on an object they've carried for a long time. So if you present me, let's say, with 5 objects that all have that characteristic, maybe from different people, I'll choose one of them that I can feel I can say something about right on the spot, and I'll do that. And they said, okay. And they're really into entertainment, and they didn't understand. I'm not into entertainment. I just talk about what I perceive, and sometimes it's bloody unpleasant for the people. So they, there's no rehearsal because, I told them I just don't want to see the objects till the last second, all right? You just bring them out on a tray and I'll pick one. And so, and this looks like magic to people, but to me, it's like, I'm hooking into someone through this, into their field, through deploying my attention to get to their field through that object that has some of their imprint on it. So this guy comes out with the tray. The compere of the show was absolutely, spoke 4 languages, was Mr. Smooth, was really good. He was, and so they bring this thing out, and I pick up an object that has, I could get a really good, strong hit on it, because I didn't want to sit there and hum and haw, because it's live TV to an audience of 8 million people. So, and there's a studio audience of about 200. And so I said, oh, yeah, I think it's the brother of this person who I see going insane. And I described how his younger brother, quite a few years ago, went insane, and it really disrupted the whole family. I just described this scene. And also I could see a room that he was in. Well, he didn't want to hear about that. And he's freaking out. And the audience is kind of going, and Mr. Compere, who was just wonderful, just did a segue instantly into some entertaining music from the musical Hair, which was out and around at that time. And I disappeared off camera. And they told me later, the producers, that they thought I was the most authentic thing they'd seen like that. But I said, well, you might want to invite me back in. They never did. But the whole thing was, what came out very strongly that guy carried with him was the impact of that breakdown of his brother and the impact it had on him and the whole family. And it was so strong in his life, you know, it was just there. And probably if he knew that was a possibility of being brought out, he never would have volunteered an object, because there were 5 people who volunteered 5 objects. And I remember in Germany, another time when we were being filmed by North German television, and the cameraman gave me something of his, and I got this whole thing about his divorce that was going on. These are the big things on their plate emotionally, so they make a very strong imprint. And so I talked about this, this divorce and what was happening. And he was just not happy at all. But it got onto North German television. I never saw it there. Some German friend of mine told me it did. So but a lot of it's just day-to-day stuff. I could be driving, and I just know this guy's going to cut in front of me. He's not signaling, he's just going to cut in front of me. So I just stay back. Sometimes I can tell just because I can see the wheels are starting to turn ever so slightly. He's ready to zip in. But it's because I'm paying attention. I'm paying attention to the intentionality of drivers around me.
That's right. So talk a bit more about intentionality, because I know that's another piece of, what you do and what you might train people in.
Okay. The way I talk about intentionality, yes, it comes out of philosophy. I think, who was it? I can't remember the name of that philosopher who really was using that term, but it landed up, it's part of, I think Heidegger talked about that. I think
Korzybski sort of altered that term. He called it intention.
No, not using. The way I'm using it is that someone's field has a kind of intended direction, or is trying to intend a certain result. For instance, when someone's about to hit someone else, because the intentionality of their field becomes intense, and there's a sense of an explosion about to happen. And so hopefully the person about to be hit is aware of that and gets out of the way. But intentionality is also, in a bigger sense, what someone is trying to do in their life, like someone who's constantly trying to hook in people to care for them. We've all known people like this who try to get the intentionality manifested in their field is to draw people in to want to help them.
Can you give a specific example? Because these are clear, but is there some particular instance that you think of, or a client or something that illustrates?
Well, I'm thinking about your ex-wife.
Probably better talk about someone else here.
Yeah, the first one.
Still better talk about someone else here. It's a public piece.
There was another woman I met that was doing the same thing, so I'll talk about that. There are women who perceive me as a rescuer. And when I was younger, I did a certain amount of rescuing. And that's still probably part of my field, And so I'm in a room with a bunch of relatives. It's a relative of Virginia. And it's quite a few years ago now. And I'm trying to remember what was going on at the time. But all of a sudden, energetically, her field just reached out to me, are you going to help me? And, because I used to pick that up when I was younger and I'd respond to it, I just acted like it wasn't happening, which isn't nice, because it's like denying part of her reality, but I definitely was not going to do any rescuing there. And you get that a lot from people. They put out to you what they want. Like certain males, they always want to dominate others. So the first thing they do when they come in the room, they send out this signal of domination. I'm here and I'm gonna do it. And what I always do with men like that is I act as if they're kind of trivial. I just don't give them much attention, or, you know, I don't get swept up in they're used to sweeping people up. I interviewed surgeons too. I'm going to have my knee operated on. And one was recommended to me who is supposedly very good at doing the surgery. And I went to see him, and he's totally wrapped up in himself. As a matter of fact, when he found out I was a statistical researcher, he wanted to show me his latest research and discuss it with me. He didn't want to discuss my knee. So he got eliminated. The guy I chose, I really get, he's very into precision. That's his main thing. He doesn't really give a shit about interacting with the people. He went through this whole, you know, kind of playing the role of, okay, he's going to talk to me about it, what the surgery is like. He's just going through it, but he goes through it like he's on autopilot. But what he really does is surgery. That's his thing. And he's now doing a study of robotic knee surgery versus non-robotic knee surgery. He does robotic. And the whole precision thing about him, and that he's not trying to prove how fantastic he is, even though he's probably quite egotistical, made me choose him. Mm-hmm. And I'd actually talked to 3 others as well.
Okay, so that's useful in day-to-day life. What about in a therapeutic situation? Can you give an example where, you know, seeing a person's intention possibly quite contrasted to how they presented or what they talked about?
It often answers the question, why, the client's question of, why am I always getting into this sort of mess? Their intentionality is aimed at that. Mm. That's where they go, that's what they go for. And when you see that as a therapist directly, then you can start to guide them how to become aware of it themselves.
Yeah, we could also, in Gestalt, we'd probably talk about that in field terms. There's a particular configuration of the field which replicates itself.
But you have to see in very direct terms where you could say, well, you know, when you met that person and you responded to something in them, I say they rang your bell, you know. And this is another thing, is that this is really about top-down programming, is that people who have bad relationships, one after another, you have to make them aware that they're looking for a certain thing. Their intentionality is aimed at finding a certain thing. And when they find it, it's like a bell goes off in them, right? And the bell goes off, and you have to say to them, as soon as that bell goes off, you know that's not the person for you. and then they'll say, how do you know that? And I'll say, well, I see what you're looking for, and periodically you get what you're looking for, and it never works. And you think you made a mistake, you didn't really get what you were looking for, but you did get what you were looking for. And when you see that directly working in them, and you see their kind of the intention, what I call the intentional structure, which is the movement of their being toward in that direction, then when you get them aware of it, then they can do something, they can start to see the possibility of changing it. But it's very hard to change that, because, you know, they really think that's the big prize, because their intentionality is so shaped to look for that prize. And it is hard to change it. It can be changed.